Feeling young. So today, I know some of you have seen me talk before, and some of you are new to this presentation of mine. I've added some new things, and it's really my great honor, it's our great honor to be back. Thank you for having us. Well, so what I want to do is talk a little bit about why the future is going to be different than what most people think. The science of aging is changing so quickly that it's hard to imagine where we will be just 5 years from now. And 20 years, we really don't know where we'll be. But one thing I know for sure is that you want to make sure that your family and your friends stay alive for when these new technologies arrive. And we already know from science that there are ways with how you live your life and also with medicines and supplements that you can help guarantee that you will be healthier for longer. And it's all based on this new science of longevity, which I think many of you have read about in my book, Lifespan. Well, actually, I started writing the book in 2004, but I finished it in 2019. And when it came out, I thought, well, these changes that will happen in the book, they might take 20 years. And then 2 months later, COVID-19 and the pandemic hit. Okay? And what happened was many people, perhaps all of us, we looked in the mirror and we saw our own mortality. But even when we're young, we can die. And the best way to stay healthy is to stay young. And so what's happened now is that the predictions in my book are already coming true. Some of you might remember I predicted that there would be a virus. I predicted that there would be biomonitoring with devices. And I predicted that there would be home testing. And I also predicted that there would be a wave of change in how people viewed their lives and the way that we lived. And you probably remember that I declared that aging should be a disease, that we should treat it like a disease. And I think a lot of the world now, including the World Health Organization, has woken up to this possibility. And that really is a different view on healthcare and on our own health. The good news is that we no longer have to age at the normal rate. We now know how to slow this process down. In my book, I talk about my grandmother, Vera. I wanted to write a book that was personal so that everybody could identify with their own family members. Most of us have seen a family member get old and sick and eventually pass away. And it's so tragic to see what happens to somebody in their 70s and 80s and 90s. Especially when it's somebody very close to us. And I watched this happen to my grandmother, Vera. Now, she didn't know the longevity science. She lived a normal life. She smoked, she drank, she didn't exercise, and she became very sick late in life. She did make it into her early 90s, which was surprising, but the last 10 years of her life were not a life at all. It was not a good life. Now, if you contrast her life with her son's life, my father, Andrew Sinclair, it's completely different. My father has embraced the longevity lifestyle. He's a scientist. I'm not experimenting on my father like some people think. I'm actually very proud of my father because he read the scientific papers, some from my lab and others from, of course, around the world. And he's applied this knowledge to his own life. So when he was in his 60s, which is late to begin, but still in his 60s, he started doing the right things. He started taking resveratrol, he started exercising, he started eating less meat and eating less often. Now he's 84, right? He was in my book, I think in my book he was 79 or 80. He's now 84, and he's still in perfect health. He still enjoys life like he did when he was 40. He likes to complain about his health, but he's actually in really good health. His latest complaint is that his vision is declining slightly, but he can still drive a car at night without glasses, so it's not so bad. But consider this, that my father is so healthy that he's now hanging out with 50-year-olds because that's how he feels. And his 85-year-old friends are mostly dead now. So that's, of course, tragic, but what I'm hoping is that my father serves as a beacon of hope for all of us, that most of us and our family members will be able to look forward to being healthy in our 80s, 90s, and beyond, and not worry about getting heart disease and cancer and diabetes. In my view, with today's technology, and certainly with tomorrow's technology, these diseases don't have to happen. We can prevent cancer now with blood tests and scanning. We can prevent diabetes with lifestyle and medicines and supplements. And heart disease, we have some really great drugs. So the major killers that killed my grandmother, and she died from cardiovascular disease, they don't have to happen like they did to previous generations. We, in our life, we can, if we have a little bit of luck, but mostly because of how we live, we can live into our 90s and perhaps beyond that without any diseases. When I started writing my book, doctors viewed aging like something separate, like aging is not a disease, it's just something that happens and it's natural and therefore acceptable. So how many of you have been to a doctor and the doctor said, well, you're losing your eyesight, or you have an ache, or you have a pain, or your teeth are wearing out, or you're losing your hearing. But that's just normal aging. Well, I refuse to accept that. Normal does not mean that it's good. In fact, normal aging is not good. We want extraordinary aging. We want a slow aging. And so I think we should regard aging and diseases as the same thing. Now that's not just a definition, it's actually scientific. The science tells us that what's causing these diseases, for the most part, is aging itself. Diabetes, heart disease, even cancer has a major component, a major part of these diseases is the aging process. And interestingly, it's the same process. The same process that causes dementia and heart disease is happening at the cellular level for the same reason. And I think we've identified one of the main reasons we get old, and that's what I want to talk about now. This is a photo when I was 27, and I was working with Lenny Guarente at MIT in Boston, and we were, as part of a team, looking for genes that control aging in yeast cells. And I've got a picture I took of a yeast cell here. This is an old yeast cell. It's yellow because it's acidic, and it's big and slow and sterile, like what happens to us. But this microscopic yeast cell, we found that we could make it live longer by changing just one gene. The gene was called a sirtuin. And yeast have 5 sirtuin genes. We have 7 in our bodies. And they require NAD to work. And I think all of you know about NAD. But this is where the story began, in yeast cells. And then when I moved to Harvard, my lab tried to understand what is it about NAD and sirtuins that controls lifespan. And we discovered that the food that the yeast were eating and the temperature that the yeast were growing in affected their life and how long they lived by acting through NAD and sirtuins. So when the yeast cell was stressed, worried about dying, it made more NAD, and the sirtuins protected the cell from damage and protected what I refer to as the information in the cell. But importantly, we could finally connect diet and the environment to health and longevity through a very simple genetic mechanism. And that was the big breakthrough in the early 2000s. So the theory that I've come up with to explain these observations is the information theory of aging, or AITOA. And what it says is that aging isn't just wearing out. It's not like we're just cars that break. We're more like computers, and that aging is the loss of the software or the corruption of the software. That is more like aging. And the important thing about that model, that hypothesis, if I'm right, it means that we may be able to reboot the system, to reinstall the software of the body and rejuvenate ourselves to young again. And let me tell you how we think this can be done. So another analogy is a compact disc. When we're young, we have lots of information that can be read in beautiful music. When we're older, it's like scratches on the CD, and you cannot read the music anymore. But the music still is beneath the scratches. So if you polish off these scratches on the CD, then, I know it's old technology, but this allowed the music to be played again. And I think aging is the same. If we just polish off the scratches, when we're old, we can read the beautiful music of our bodies again. So this is what it looks more like in the cell. So there are two types of information that we lose as we get older. So when we're born, we have a beautiful copy of DNA in our cells. Every cell has the same DNA, and it doesn't have many mistakes. But as we get older, we lose some of that information in the DNA. But importantly, it's not so much the loss of that information that causes aging. We know this because we can take an old cell from an animal, from a sheep or a monkey or a dog or a cat, and we can make an entirely new animal by cloning it, which means aging is reversible, and the DNA in an old animal can still make a brand new animal that's healthy. So if it's not primarily the loss of DNA information, what is it? Well, I'm saying that it's the other type of information in the cell, the epigenetic information, or the epigenome, which is actually not the DNA itself, but the folding of the DNA. And how the DNA is folded determines which of the music is played in the cell, or which genes are turned on at the right time. And it's what makes a skin cell, and a brain cell, a brain cell. All right? So think of every cell having the same music, but which songs are played is determined by the epigenome, the structures of the DNA. And now we can read those structures, and we can see how the epigenome changes with aging. And the science says that the changes to those loops and the bundles of DNA is very likely a major reason why we get old. So to reverse aging, if I'm right, all you have to do is to put the DNA back into the original shapes. The loops need to go back to being bundles again, and the bundles can go back to being loops. We also know that the epigenome is important because even identical twins age differently. These are identical twins, not with each other, they have identical twins, and you can see that the twin looks different because one twin did the wrong things. They may have smoked or become obese, ate too much bad food, and the other one was healthy. So what this says is that even with the same parents and the same DNA, you can age at very different rates. And I think you can see that, especially with this lady, the one on the right looks younger. And we can actually measure this, not just by looking at the person, but we can measure their age by looking at the chemical changes on their DNA that controls whether you have a loop or a bundle of DNA in the cell. These little chemicals are called methyls, and we can read them with the machine. My students do this all the time in the lab. We just published a paper that made this test go from $200 down to $5. So for $5, we can read your DNA, and we can say how old you are, but not how old you are based on your birthday candles. What's more important is, what is the structure of your epigenome? Are those loops and bundles of DNA changing? And what we know from work by many labs The most well-known is Stephen Horvath's lab, and this clock that I'm showing you on this slide is called a Horvath clock. If you have an older biological age, older epigenome, you get sick earlier and you die younger. But if you have a young epigenome, a young biological age, on average, you will be protected against diseases and live longer. Again, very good evidence that the epigenome is the key to longevity. And you can change how fast you age. You can age very quickly by doing the wrong things, which we'll talk about. We can age very slowly if you do the right things. And even if you're aging quickly, you can slow it down at any age. I'm often asked, is it ever too late to start? And my answer to that is no. We can even treat mice that are the equivalent of 90-year-old humans and make them live a lot longer. So it's never too late to implement the kind of things that my father is doing. So we recently published the information theory of aging. And what's funny about that is that it first came out in my book in 2019. And then I was very busy doing research, so I didn't write it into a scientific publication until 2020. I think it was 2024 it came out. But it's been embraced by the scientific community. And so now we have not just the general public excited about this theory, but scientists as well. And this is a picture from this paper, shoulders of a very famous scientist called Claude Shannon, also from MIT, who was trying to preserve information in radio waves and in computers eventually. And I've used his theory and his equations to do the same thing for biology. And he invented the backup copy of information, which is called the observer in his paper from 1948. And I also call it the observer. It really is, it's an idea that we have a backup copy of youthful, original information that we can flip the reset switch. And if that's true, then aging should be reversible, right? That's a big deal. Imagine if aging were reversible. Well, the first thing we did to test this theory was to damage the epigenome and make the DNA unwind. And if the theory is correct, we should get aging, accelerated aging. And that's what we got. This is a picture from a study that took us 13 years of work. There were 47 scientists involved, 15 labs around the world, and we published it last year in the world's leading journal for biology called Cell. And what this picture shows is that when you scratch the CD of a mouse, essentially what we're doing is disrupting the epigenome, we get aging. This mouse, by all measures, is old, 50% older than its brother or sister. So we gave a mouse aging. We started to work on how to take away aging. Now, just a little bit about NAD. There's a lot of work now in the literature, so much, there's hundreds of papers showing that NAD levels go down as we get older. So I'm 54 now, and I have half the levels that I did when I was 20. If I didn't supplement, I do supplement, of course. I think it's not a secret to you that I take NMN every day. So NAD is, because it's going down with aging, we've been working on ways to raise NAD to make the cellular defenses against aging more active, the sirtuins. Not the sirtuins in yeast cells, but the sirtuins in our bodies. And what this slide shows you is that by giving precursors to the body to make NAD, we can raise the levels. And I'll show you some clinical trials in humans in a minute. What's happening after you raise the NAD levels, it's very complicated. There's hundreds of things that happen that are good for us. There's improved blood flow, there's less inflammation, cells survive better, the brain works better, of course. But lots of good things happen, as I put on the slide, including the recycling of proteins to keep the brain healthy. The NAD booster that I've been working on for the last decade is NMN. There are other precursors, but NMN in our hands works the best in mouse studies, and seemingly in human studies as well. Now, one of the first things we did, let me see, are these mice running yet? Yeah, it's a little bit slower, but the mouse on the left has been drinking water that has a little bit of NMN in it. And in 2018, we published this paper in the same journal, Cell, and we found that when mice drink NMN water, they can run 50% further. They run like they were young again. These old mice become young again. And what happens is that their muscles have more blood in them, there's better flow of blood. And then this was also shown later by a collaborator of mine to work in the brain as well. So it seems like NMN rejuvenates the vascular system in the mouse, and we're looking for the same things in humans as well. We're doing those studies now. So there have been some studies published. If any of your friends or clients ask, well, what's the proof in humans? You can point them to these papers that are coming out. These papers have been done by many different labs now. This is a study that I was involved in at Harvard. Shailendra Basin is the doctor who ran these studies. And what he's finding is that a version of NMN, which is a crystalline version that we work with, is very safe. And we're starting to see benefits. We see lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, lower triglycerides, with just 4 weeks of taking either 1 gram or 2 grams a day. This is the other study that you might want to look up. It's available online, you should be able to get it. And this was done in overweight people. And we chose overweight people because they have the lowest NAD levels, thinking that we have a big effect. And in this study, you'll see that there was better cholesterol, better blood pressure, and better triglycerides. This is a very safe molecule, and maybe either a replacement or an additive with current medicines for cardiovascular disease. But we're also looking for other changes that includes improved endurance, better running, better strength, even better memory. And right now we have at least 5 clinical studies in progress. And in this study we showed, or the scientists showed, that NMN is very safe. There was no evidence of any negative effects. All right, so just to finish up, I want to talk about what does the future look like? What can we look forward to in the future? If I'm right about the information theory of aging, then we should have a backup copy of youth, and if we push the reset button, we should get younger. Not just by a little bit, by a lot. And we started working on this, about 6 years ago, and we wanted to find a way to reset the cell to be younger. And one idea that we had is that we could use genes that keep embryos young, keep eggs and sperm and embryos young. And there are many genes that keep embryos young, but there are 4 of them that are particularly interesting. It was discovered by Professor Shinya Yamanaka. He published it first in 2006. He won the Nobel Prize, I believe it was in 2012, for showing that 4 embryonic genes, when you put it into an older cell, that those cells can become stem cells again, as I show on this slide. But this could not be used for aging reversal, because if you turn our bodies into stem cells, we'll have cancer. And it's known if you turn on these 4 Yamanaka genes, which we call O, S, K, and M for short. If you put O, S, K, and M into a mouse, it's not healthy. It dies within 2 days. This is not advisable. Do not try that at home. But my student, whose name is Wan-Cheng Ru, he's now at MIT, he has moved on. He had a breakthrough. Actually, he was about to quit his PhD. He was very upset in my office to the point of crying. And I said, you should keep going. I have a good feeling that we'll make a breakthrough. And he tried a very important experiment. I think it'll turn out to be an historical experiment. Instead of putting the 4 Yamanaka genes into old human cells, he put 3 of them, just the 3 OSK. He didn't put the M gene in, the MYC, because it causes cancer. And what he found was that if we used just 3 of the Yamanaka genes, something amazing happened. The human cells got younger, but they did not turn into cancer. They just became younger and stopped. They didn't go back to being a stem cell. And this was a breakthrough because this is now the possibility of reversing aging safely for the first time. He proposed an experiment to me. He said, David, let's cure blindness in old animals. And I said, well, that's a pretty tough experiment. Can't we do something easy like fixing the liver? And he said, no, I want to cure blindness. So he's a pretty stubborn kid. So I let him do the experiment, and I'm glad I did. In this experiment, these are not old mice, but these are mice that have damaged optic nerves. So one test for whether you can rejuvenate the body is to look at the growth of the optic nerve. And what you're looking at is on the top band, a lot of death of the optic nerve. Because if it was healthy, it would be bright orange, but it's mostly brown. So it's dead after the damage to the optic nerve. And we know that nerves don't grow back if you damage them, right? If you break your back or you go blind, you do not recover. But what Wan Cheng showed that if you turn on those 3 genes to reprogram the cell to be young, the nerves grew back again, like young, very young nerve cells. And you can see that there's a lot more orange. And Wan Cheng texted these pictures to me, it was 2017, and he said, David, do you see what I see? And I said, I think I see what you see. He said, what do you see? And my answer was, I see the future. And I could already see that if we can rejuvenate the eye, we can rejuvenate the skin, the liver, the brain, and we're doing that now. So we tested this in mice that have pressure in the eye from glaucoma, one of the leading causes of blindness, and that worked. Bruce Cassandra's lab at Harvard did this work with us. So we can cure blindness in glaucoma, and we hope to test this in humans next year. But we also wanted to test old mice, and this is a picture of an old mouse, or a video of an old mouse that is blind. It cannot see, and it is not moving its head because it's blind. If it could see, it would move its head in response to those moving lines. It's called the optomotor response. So this is a blind old mouse. What happened was amazing. After just 6 weeks, we cured blindness completely in this mouse. And in this, hopefully you can see that this mouse turns its head because it can see again. And we can measure that with electrical probes. But we showed for the first time that you can cure blindness in an animal that's old or diseased. And this was quite a surprise to the field of optometry, because there was nothing that you could do for blindness. But now we have hope. Now we have hope that even if you are blind, perhaps one day you can see again. And we should know this by next year. It was a big enough discovery that it got published in the world's one of the world's leading scientific journals, Nature. And on the cover, they put a picture of the eye, and the title was Turning Back Time. And that's certainly a highlight of my career, to get that. The next step was to try to make this into a medicine to treat people. And I formed a company called Life Biosciences. They are in Massachusetts, and they are working towards making a medicine to cure blindness in people. And they reported just last year that it works in monkeys, that if you damage a monkey's eye and you give it the treatment, it can see again. Now, mice are very different than humans. Their eyes are not exactly the same structure. But this monkey's eye is identical to a human eye. And our DNA is very similar to ours, 99%. So I'm very optimistic that what we're seeing in the monkey will work in humans. And I really can't wait to see what the results are next year. If you're wondering how it would work, it would be an injection into the eye with a virus. The virus takes the genes into the nerves, and we turn on those genes with a simple antibiotic, doxycycline. We chose doxycycline because it's safe and cheap. But when we give this molecule, it turns on the genes, and then the eye gets rejuvenated. And it takes about 6 to 8 weeks. We also know that the effect lasts for a long time. In the mouse, it lasted for the rest of the life of the animal. So we hope that perhaps every decade you get rebooted, you get your eyesight back. And that could be true for every organ. It doesn't just have to be the eye. We chose the eye not because it's easy, but because it was super hard and it worked. But these therapies that we're developing are probably going to cost a few $100,000, which is worth it if you're blind, but it's not going to be usable for everybody. It's too expensive. So my lab is now working on making it, instead of $300,000, we could potentially do it for $10. It's not an if, it's just a when it's possible, then the world will be a very different place. So how are we doing this? Well, I'm very fortunate that I have a very dedicated team of about 20 young scientists who are working every day, literally every day of the week, to make this possible. So I do want to give them credit. And what they're doing is they've developed ways to measure aging in a dish. Okay? And now we can look not just at one gene or one chemical, we can look at thousands, and with AI, millions, even billions of molecules, and see which ones can reverse aging. And last year we published a paper that identified the first chemicals that can reverse aging in cells safely. And we're looking for even better ones. And so what the future looks like, in my view, it will be possible one day to take a pill and reverse the age of the body. I don't know if it's going to be in 2 years or in 20 years, but it is going to be possible. We're also looking at reversing aging of the brain, because there's no point being young if you don't have your mind and your memory. And so a student, Xiao Tian, he now works in San Diego in his own lab. What we're going to publish, so you're hearing it before it's published, what we're showing is that you can use the same genes to turn on in the brain and make a mouse's brain much younger. And when we do that, the mouse gets its memory back, meaning it can learn again. But we also see that memories that were lost come back again. So lost memories can also be reversed by this technology. I want to be there the day that the first person is treated, and hopefully they recognize their family again. So we're also growing brains in the lab because it's quicker to treat dish-grown brains than actual humans. And these are examples of that. You can see on the left on this slide are little human brains we grow. And we're the only lab in the world that can drive aging forwards and backwards. We can make these brains get 70 years old in a week, and then we can reverse that. And these brains get their activity, electrical activity, back again. And we're using this as a model for Alzheimer's disease and dementia. On the right-hand side, these are electrodes where we measure the activity of the brains. Just to sum up this part of the talk, this isn't just about molecules and cells, it's about families. It's about keeping our loved ones healthy and alive and productive and less cost to society, and really just trying to reimagine the future, because for too long we've just accepted aging as something that is inevitable and we shouldn't do anything about it. But I think all of you will agree with me now that aging is something that is not acceptable. It doesn't have to be acceptable, and we can already do something about it. So I want to just quickly share with you some insights. What can you do now? So these are the things that I do. So we typically try not to eat all the time. We think 3 big meals a day is too much food, and I try to skip at least 1 meal a day. What we're trying to do as a theme is to make the body feel under adversity. So adversity is a threat of dying, and so when you don't eat, and if you have to run, or if you don't get enough amino acids or less amino acids, it actually makes the body turn on its survival genes, like the sirtuins, and raise NAD levels. So moving and stretching is important. What is recommended, though, is at least 3 times a week, do some aerobic exercise and lift some weights. And please do that, because if you look at my father, he does this, and it's paying off greatly. So have your body in adversity mode, as I mentioned. Try to get the amount of sleep that you need. Now, for Serena and me, we can get by with less sleep because we've optimized our sleep. We get very deep sleep. Serena's, you get about 3 hours of deep sleep out of 5 per night, maybe. So she's optimized her sleep. But some people need 6, some people need 8 hours. You'll find out. But you can take some supplements that'll put you into deep sleep. I do take supplements to go into deep sleep. But do that because the genes that control aging are the same genes that control sleep. And if you mess up your sleep, you can also mess up your aging rate. She says eat the rainbow. But what we mean by that is when you eat plants that are not grown under perfect conditions. So maybe they don't get enough light, or they got too much light, or they're dehydrated. These plants make molecules that are very healthy. You can get it from green tea matcha. You can get it from, well, I used to say red wine, but the alcohol is not good, but there's a lot of polyphenols in red wine. If you eat foods that are fresh, organically grown, full of color, you're guaranteed to get more of these molecules that give you the health, like resveratrol is one we've studied. And what we like to do is science. We measure ourselves, we change something, we measure again, and so we do a lot of testing on ourselves. Now this is a test that I took called Inside Tracker, and there are a number of tests you can do on yourself if you want. You can measure your DNA methylation age. There are companies that do that, at least in the US I'm aware of. This Inside Tracker age, I plotted myself against 53-year-olds last year, and where I ended up was one of the youngest out of the 10,000 people that they looked at. And I don't tell you that because I want to boast. It's the opposite. I want to tell you, if I can be apparently around 10 years younger than my age, anyone can do it. Because I'm traveling, I'm pretty lazy, I like eating. I'm not a role model for optimal health. But even I can be this healthy by making these small choices about how to live my life. Avoid sugar. Sugar is, you could think of it as poison. It's not that poisonous, but over the long run, the sugar will bind to proteins and it will cause a lot of problems, not just diabetes, but it'll create aging. You can eat what a lot of people would call a Mediterranean diet, but we try to avoid meat. In fact, I've become vegan now. I try not to eat meat very often. And when I stopped drinking alcohol and I went on a vegan diet, actually my age got even younger. And this was about 2.5 years ago that I started this. And inflammation in my body went way down. I didn't realize that what I was eating, which was a lot of red wine and cheese, was really causing a lot of inflammation in my body. We try not to snack. If we're a little bit hungry, we'll drink some tea, but we try to avoid constantly eating throughout the day. It's okay to feel a little bit hungry, and you can get rid of it with some hot water or some tea. Be active, build muscle, especially when you get older. Like my father, he works out with weights 3 times a week. It's very important. Try to skip a meal. This one's important. Change your lifestyle slowly. If you try to do everything at once, you'll fail. Make 1 or 2 changes and see how you go. And do it for at least 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, you'll get used to it. It'll become a habit. So finally, what about the supplements? Well, of course, NAD boosters are in there. We take NMN. If you take 1 gram of NMN, you'll double your NAD. If you take 2 grams, you triple it. That's the rough guide based on the human studies. And I've been taking around 1,000 milligrams a day for, probably over 10 years now. Berberine and metformin are 2 things that increase your sensitivity to insulin and get rid of blood sugar in your bloodstream. Berberine is a supplement, metformin is a drug. They both show a lot of promise for longevity as well. Resveratrol, I discovered in my lab, this going back now 20 years ago. There's still a lot of evidence in humans that resveratrol is healthy in the long run. So I still take resveratrol every day. I put a teaspoon in our matcha or in a little bit of yogurt in the morning. Physeden I mentioned because it's also a SIRT1 activator, like resveratrol is, but it also is known to kill old zombie cells. Spermidine is interesting because it stabilizes the epigenome and mimics fasting. you've got to make sure your vitamins are good. So I'm not in the sun very much, so I take vitamin D. I also take K2, which is important for the cardiovascular system. B vitamins are very important if you don't eat a lot of meat. Alpha lipoic acid is something that'll rev up your metabolism, so I've been taking that for about 15 years. Oh, I take an aspirin. I believe that over the long run it's helpful for the cardiovascular system. And we take, for inflammation, omega-3 fatty acids, 3, 6, and 9, all 3 types. You can get this from fish oil, or you can get it synthesized. Either way, as long as it's pure, it's very good. Now, often people say, which supplements should I choose? You want to get it from a supplier that is reputable. It has to come from a company that shows that they've tested its quality. And GMP, those 3 letters are important too, good manufacturing practices. So I want to end by saying it's a very exciting time to be alive. You know, it's a bit like when the Wright brothers discovered flying. People knew the world would never be the same. But the ability to slow and reverse aging, as it's now becoming possible, is even more important than flying. It's going to change the world perhaps as much or more as AI is changing the world right now. And I think the 21st century that we live in now is going to be remembered not just for computers and AI, but it's going to be remembered as the century that we learned how to control our own biology for the first time. And thank goodness we're all still alive to be able to witness this radical change and help others also live the best possible and longest lives that they can. Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.